The Promised Land, Lesson 8, and we were talking about the Roman Empire last week, and I want to continue with that, trying to get it tied together to where I want to get to the next time. There's a lot of history happens in a few thousand years, and so it's hard to keep track of it. But so I'm trying to hit the high spots, the things that are important to us in understanding what the Promised Land is, why it's called the Promised Land, and why it's important to Israel, and why it's important to the people in the Middle East. And in so doing, we've gotten up through the Roman Empire, and tonight I want to talk about Rome, the divided Roman Empire. And this was a division 395 A.D. under Theodosius, who was the emperor at the time, and he divided the kingdom in order to make it more manageable. And you have, of course, the Eastern Kingdom here and the Western Empire there. And the over here in Constantinople is called Istanbul today, is where the capital was, because Constantine moved the capital there, and he's the one who's considered the first Christian emperor. Anyway, the kingdom was divided for whatever reason, and it doesn't, if we could get into all the details, but it won't help us any in our study here. So I want to start with this. In the first century A.D., the presence of Palestine, the Promised Land, was dominated by the Romans and the Jews. And that's where we were last time. Herod ruled Judea as primarily a Jewish kingdom. And we talked about that. What religion arose in the first century that began to influence the Promised Land at that time? In the first century. What religion, new religion came about? It wasn't intended to be a religion, but in the first century, it was Christianity. It was because Jesus lived on the earth here, and he was crucified, and he resurrected, and the church was born. And the church, the birth of the church, can be tracked back, as far as I'm concerned, to the second chapter of the book of Acts. And the second chapter, verse 41 says, So those who accepted his message were baptized, and that day about 3,000 people were added to them. And they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching, to the fellowship, to the breaking of bread, and to the prayers. So Peter preaches his first message he's ever preached and gets 3,000 converts on his first message. So that was a pretty good response for that. I don't know how many people were there, but 3,000 of them, it says, became believers at that particular time. And that the church was born. So as we look through what's going on, we're going to see that involved in some of the what's going to happen here has to do with the Promised Land. Palestina Prima, Palestina 1, or Palestina Secunda, which is Palestina 2. It's Palestina Prima, or Palestina 1, was a Byzantine province. So the Byzantine Empire, it was a province of, that's where the name they used for that, it was a province of the Byzantine Empire that existed from the 4th century until the Muslim conquest of the Levant in the 630s in the region of Palestine. It was, and notice it says, in the region of Palestine. It was temporarily lost to the Sassanid kingdom or empire, which was the Persian Empire, in 614, but reconquered in 628. You'll see in a little while, it didn't stay conquered long. Palestina Secunda, or Palestina II, was a province of the Byzantine Empire from 390 until its conquest by the Muslim armies of 634-636. Palestina Secunda roughly comprised the Galilee, Yisrael Valley, Beth Shean Valley, and the southern part of the Golan Plateau, with its capital in Scythopolis. That sounds almost like a Superman movie or something. That was the name of the capital. The province experienced the rise of Christianity under the Byzantines, but was also a thriving center of Judaism. So, here's a map, shows these two, the Palestinas here, and the provinces, and the kingdoms that are in them, or the cities that are in them, and so on, and gives you an idea of the area at that particular time under the Byzantine Empire. If during this time you were a citizen of Palestina or Palestine, what would be your identity? If you're a citizen of Palestine, what would be your nationality? When was the term Palestine first used in relation to a location? So that's three of the questions I want to try to answer here to get us going so we can understand more about the Promised Land and why it was called Palestine, where the name came from, and so on. Some people say Palestine. Most people I know say Palestine. Syria, Palestina, or Roman Palestine, was a Roman province in the Palestine region between the early 2nd century and late 4th centuries A.D. The province capital was Caesarea Maritima. So, I have two maps here to give you an idea. This one shows Syria, Palestine in Roman Empire around 200 BC, 350 AD. So, probably 550-year period of time. This one is a more realistic map, but you can't see it very well. This was a lot easier to read. So you can see the areas that are divided up, and the area down here referred to as Palestina. And they use that name to designate for this particular area. And you can see over in Egypt the way it's divided up different than what it is today in Arabia and Syria, Mesopotamia, and so on, which doesn't exist now, Cilicia, Pamphylia, all of those different countries and provinces, more so than countries, they were provinces under the empire at this particular time, under the Roman Empire. In 602, the final war between the Byzantine Empire and its eastern rival, the Sassanid Empire, Persian Empire, broke out. In 613, the Persians invaded the Levant. Now, look at this part. The Jews revolted against the Byzantines, hoping to secure autonomy for Jerusalem. The following year, Persian Jewish forces captured Caesarea and Jerusalem, destroying its churches, massacring its Christian population, and taking the true cross. You notice it says they took the true cross. They thought they had the true cross, the cross that Jesus was crucified on at that time, and they referred to it as the true cross. But you'll notice that the Jews of that time, they sided with one side, and the Christians were on the other side, which is the Byzantine, and they wound up being massacred at this time. The Roman Empire, or Roman Emperor, Heraclius, began a successful counteroffensive. By 627, 628, he advanced to the Persian heartland. And because of that, they wound up coming up with a peace treaty between them. And the Persians sued for peace, it says. And it said they returned the Roman provinces they had captured and the stolen relics. In March 629, they triumphantly entered and brought the true cross back. I'm glad they brought it back. It's nice that they brought it back. Who knows what it was. He promised the Jews pardon, but he didn't live up to his bargain. He had them expelled anyway, and there's a lot that happened. Now, a lot of this that I'm talking about, and we have to, when we're talking about these areas, unless you want to spend weeks and years and years and years studying it, we can't go through a minute history of everything that happened and everything that was going on. So this gives you kind of an idea. So still in this area, what did you have? You had an area that, we'll put it this way, how many Muslims were in Palestina at this time? Hang on. The term Palestine first appeared in the 5th century BC when the ancient Greek historian Herodotus wrote of a district of Syria called Palestine between Phoenicia and Egypt in the Histories. That's what his writing was called, the Histories. Who inhabited this region at this time? Who inhabited this area at that time? In 500, there were Jews there. There were other people. There were mixed people. There was many different groups of people that were there, but the Jews were there. Somebody who was not there were the Muslims. None. There were no Muslims there in 500. Why not? And I said, who was there? And I said, the Greeks were who was there. But the Greeks were a mix of people. They were not just one homogeneous group. That's just like saying you're an American. Does that mean you're the same race as the person next door to you? It doesn't. You can be an American, and it's many different races, many different groups of people. There were Jews who had never left the land, and there were Jews who returned after the exile when the Persians took control of the area over the Babylonians, and they allowed them to go back to Jerusalem. So the Jews that were living there all the time had stayed there, were there. The Jews that came back from Babylon, they came back to that area under Cyrus's edict, as we had talked about before. So that gets us back to our map that we started with. Byzantine diocese, 5th century, and this is what it looked like. And it was the area of Palestine, 5th century. 5th century, there's still no Muslims there, and there's a reason for it. Palestina Secunda, or Palestina II, was a province of the Byzantine Empire from 390 until its conquest by the Muslim armies in 634 and 636. Okay, pay attention to those dates. Palestina Secunda roughly comprised, and it tells all the areas that I'd read before. Now let's look at the Byzantine Empire to get us to where I want to go tonight, or where I want us to be, to give an idea of who was living in this land and why they were living here and so on. If you look at the line out here, this is the extent of the empire under Justin I in 527 to 565, the Roman Empire. Remember, it split, and then you had the western part and the eastern part. And then this part that you see here was in 1020. You see how much it has shrunk. And down here is where Jerusalem and Syria and all these areas, and you notice that by 1020, the Byzantine Empire no longer had control of the area that's called Palestine, referred to as Palestine, where it says Palestine here in Syria and even Egypt and so on. The Byzantine Empire no longer controlled that, and it gets down to smaller. The Empire of 1360 is right here. So the Byzantine Empire and the Roman Empire continue to shrink and shrink and shrink. The western part of the Roman Empire had fallen by this time, had crumbled into nothingness, and had been taken over by at least the barbarian hordes, if you will, have been taken over by the Germanic peoples from the north, and as well as others. And there's many different reasons why, and we could get into a long discussion on that, which we won't. But anyway, it got smaller and smaller and smaller, so they weren't controlling this. So who was? So the Byzantine Empire existed from 330 to 1453. It is often called the Eastern Roman Empire, or simply Byzantium. The Byzantine capital was founded at Constantinople by Constantine I. He founded a capital there, and he was nice enough to name it after himself. It's a good way to do it. He's the emperor, he can do what he wants to. The Byzantine Empire varied in size over the centuries. It got bigger, it would get smaller, it would get a little bigger, and it would get smaller. It continued to get different sizes and controlling different areas until it finally did not exist anymore after 1453. A lot of people call the era that we're talking about, that we had entered into it, the first of this, they called it the Dark Ages. And most historians today that I have read after don't use the term Dark Ages anymore. The Dark Ages implies that there were no sophistication. There was no education of any kind. It was a time there's not many scientific findings. There's nothing much going on, but it was not true. It was in the Eastern Empire, but not in the Western Empire. So when you talk about it's a misnomer as far as I'm concerned to call it the Dark Ages. It's more the Middle Ages is more a proper way to put it. The Byzantine Empire continued to dwindle until it was conquered by the Ottomans in 1453. Who were the Ottomans? Another good question. Who were the Ottomans? We'll get back in a minute. Pardon me? The feet people? They made the stool that you prop your feet up on. That's not. But anyway, the Ottoman Empire. Why were there no Muslims in Palestine, in the promised land at this particular time? Why were they not there? Why were there no Muslims there at the time that we were talking about at the beginning, at the time that Constantinople was the capital of Rome, of the Roman Empire, not the city of Rome? Why was there no Muslims there? There's a good reason. Herodotus first used the term in the 5th century of Palestine, so let's look at this. Origin of Islam. According to secular history, this is the Muslims say this is according to secular history, and I'll tell you why in a minute. The origin of Islam can be traced back to the 7th century Saudi Arabia. Islam is thus the youngest of the three great religions of the world that came from Abraham. The Prophet Muhammad lived circa 570 to 632 AD, and he founded Islam in 610. So why were there no Muslims in the Promised Land in the 500s? Because there were no Muslims. The Islamic faith had not been formed yet, had not come about yet, had not been founded yet, because it was founded by Muhammad. Muhammad, the one that founded it, and he died in 632, around 632 AD. And it says this is the writings of Muhammad is what the Quran is, but Muhammad was illiterate. He couldn't read or write. So it's really the sayings of Muhammad and the people that would described, if you will, that he would dictate to them what he said an angel would say to him, and he would go into different types, like some people say like a trance, and he would repeat these things, and then they'd write down what it was. And not all the Muslims and not all the ones that followed him agreed on what he said, so it took a while before it got out to where it is now as the Quran. Muhammad dictated the Quran, the holy book of Islam, which Muslims believe to be the pre-existent, perfect words of Allah. Muslims don't say that they're the newest faith. They say that the Christian faith, the Jewish faith, the Muslim faith, all came from the same thing. We all came from the seed of Abraham, but the words of the Quran are actually older than the Bible, because this is Allah's words, this is God's word, and this was before any of the rest of these. It just happened to be that an angel told them to Muhammad, and he had them to write it down. That's a strange way of putting it, but that's to give you an idea. But that's answering the question of why is it there were no Muslims in this area that you call Palestine up until 636, 637, sometime like that area. There were no Muslims there because no Muslims existed. The Muslim faith didn't exist. You couldn't have Muslims there. That's just like saying back in 200 BC, how many Christians were in Jerusalem? Well, there was none, because there was not any Christians. So the oldest of the three faiths in that respect is Judaism. But we see ourselves as Christians, followers of Jesus Christ. We were born into the seed of Abraham, just like them. So we see the Jewish faith and the Jewish part of the Bible. The Old Testament is part of our faith as much so as any of the rest of it. Some people, anyway, I won't get into that because that'd get into a dispute. The Muslims believe that the words of the Quran pre-existed all of time. So if God pre-existed all time and the words of the Quran were from God, then that pre-existed everything else. So everything else is, it's like in the Quran it says Jesus was not crucified. It says Jesus was not the Son of God. The teaching of the Muslims is that the seed of Abraham, they're the seed of Abraham, but they say it's through Ishmael, and we say it's through Isaac. The Bible says through Isaac. Whatever the claim, Islam as a religion began with Muhammad in 610 A.D. There could be no Muslim Palestinians because there were no Muslims. So up until that time, and remember this study is getting us an idea of the conflict that's going on over there today. Does Israel have a right to live where they live, or should they not exist? Should the Palestinians have that land where they are today, which is called Israel, because they say from the river to the sea, Palestine shall be free. That's from the Jordan River all the way to the Mediterranean Sea. So the question is, who does it belong to? We started all the way back with Abraham. Abraham was promised the land for his descendants and went all the way through. So, up to this point, when did God promise the land to Abraham's descendants? And it was about 1884 BC. That's a long time ago. When did the Muslims conquer Palestine? It's about 634 AD. So how many years was that land a possession of Abraham and his descendants up until the time period where the Muslims conquered this area? 2,518 years roughly. That's a long time. That's a long time. And up to this point, if you followed each one of the classes we had up to this time, you can see where the Jews were in this land to some degree from that time, from the time the 12 tribes came back there after they came back from Egypt, from then right on up until now, and still even after the Muslims conquered the area, there were still Jews in this area. They didn't annihilate all the Jews. Now, the term Peliset is found in 5 inscriptions referring to the neighboring people, the Philistines, or their land, Philistia, starting from circa 1150 BC. That was a long time back as well. The Assyrians called the same region Palestu or Philistu. All those are interesting words. The term Palestine first appeared in the 5th century BC under Herodotus that we'd already talked about. It was a district of Syria called Palestine. That's where it got its name. It was at this time, it was not a country. It was not a race of people. It was a name of a district, a province. For instance, if you said America, what is America? When we think of America, we think of the United States. But is that all there is? Canada's in America. South America's in America. All this is America. But that's not a nation. That's not a people. That's not a race. That's a location. That's a place. Does that make sense? In the early 2nd century CE, the term Syria Palestina, literally Palestinian Syria, was given to a Roman province incorporating Judea and other territories. And around the year 390, during the Byzantine period that we were just talking about, the imperial province of Syria Palestina was then reorganized into Palestina Prima and Palestina Secunda and Palestina Salutaris into 3 different areas, and the 2 that were interested in are Prima and Secunda. What happened in the promised land and who inhabited the land from the 7th century conquest to the land of the land by the Muslims and the conquest by the Ottomans in 1517 A.D. We talked about the Ottomans, who they were. It was in 1517, and it's when they came to power in the Middle East. So what groups of people lived in that land from the time of the Arabs conquered that land and took it away from the Byzantine Empire in the 600s, in the 7th century, until 1517 AD. Who lived in that area that we call the Promised Land, that was called the Land of Canaan, that now is referred to as Palestine and refers to as Israel? Who lived in that land for all those hundreds of years between the first conquest and the time the Ottomans took over? Jews and a mix of other people. They're all different kind of people, and as well as there are also Christians there. There are a lot of Christians in the area. You know from reading the Bible that sometimes we overlook this if we're not careful. The Christian church started in Israel. The church started in Jerusalem. That's where it was. And when you start reading the book of Acts, to start with, that's where they are. And it said they sold everything and had everything in common, and they helped each other out, and they did all these kind of things. But what happened was with the Christian church, with the Christians that were in this area, they were still living here in Jerusalem, in Israel, in the different surrounding areas. And as persecution came in from the emperors at that particular time, the Christian community began to scatter out, and that's more or less when they started going out to different places and started founding churches all throughout the different empires. Was because of the persecution, they spread out. But to begin with, it was Christians there. So still all throughout this time, you would have had Jews there, you'd have had Christians there, you'd have had finally in the 7th century, you'd have Muslims there because they had been their Islamic faith had been founded by that particular time. So you'd have Muslims there so far as faiths go, but you'd have many different nationalities and groups of people. It's not one homogeneous group of people called by one particular name. I want to go through. There's a lot of time between the 7th century and 1517 AD. If you want me to go through in detail, I will, but I don't think you do. So I'm going to hit a few highlights of what occurred. Under the first period, 637, 638, said Jerusalem falls to the armies of Rashidun. Jews were permitted, now get this, Jews were permitted to return to the city after 560 years of Roman and Byzantine rule. So the Jews, even more Jews were coming back to the city of Jerusalem, and I'm centering a lot of this around Jerusalem because that helps center what we're talking about. So more Jews came back to the area who hadn't been there before. The next one, 661, another family took control of the caliphate, and they moved the capital to Damascus. In 687, 691, the Dome of the Rock is built on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. I've put a note here. The Muslims believe that Muhammad was taken up into heaven from this spot at one time. But look at 745, it's still in this time when it's under the control of the Muslims. Theodore is appointed Patriarch of Jerusalem. Theodore, does that sound like a Muslim name or an Arab name or a Jewish name? It's not. The reason it's not is because he's a Christian. He was the one he was the, we'll say the head Christian of the area at this particular time. He was appointed as the Patriarch of Jerusalem. So you can see the Christian contingent that was there and follow through with them. The next one, 647 to 750, or 747 to 750, civil war resulted, and the Abbasid family seizing control of the caliphate. So there was more war. So here we have, all through this time, you're going to see as we're going through here, you have one clan of Muslims fighting another clan of Muslims to take over a particular caliphate and say that we're really the ones that should be in control of this at this particular time. We're really the heritage of Muhammad more so than you are, and there were different things that happened, they said, throughout the time. But all during this period, watch what happens. 792 to 793, war between the tribes of Palestine. So here, all of a sudden, we have within there's war going on between the different ones. 799, the Patriarch of Jerusalem sends a mission to the Frankish king Charlemagne and the latter returns the favor. So the patriarch, who would the patriarch be? That would be a Christian leader who's living in Jerusalem. So while these wars are going on, while these Arabs are fighting, these Muslims are fighting back and forth with each other to see who controls the area, we still have Christians here. If you have Christians here, do you think there's Jews here too? I would say so. There are Jews here as well. 800, the Jewish High Council, headed by Golan, moves from Tiberias to Jerusalem. So he moves from Tiberias to Jerusalem. So now we have Christian patriarch, and we have a Jewish High Council representative is living here in Jerusalem. So what do we have? We have Muslims, we have Christians, we have Jews living in this area. What was the name of this country? There wasn't a particular name. Okay. 820, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre is repaired. 937, March 26, rioting Muslims burned down the Church of the Resurrection and loot the chapel of Golgotha. So Muslims, can you believe there'd be war between Muslims and Christians? 966, the Muslim Jewish mob tortures the Church of Resurrection, plunders it, and kills Jerusalem's patriarch John the Seventh. So now we have Muslims and Jews fighting together against Christians. Interesting. Fatimid period, 969 to 970. The Fatimids, a self-proclaimed Shia caliphate. In other words, they said, that's who we are. We're the caliphate. We're the real caliphate now. 978, Joseph II is appointed Patriarch of Jerusalem. So who would he be? He would be a Christian. He's appointed as Patriarch of Jerusalem. 1015, September the 4th, was an earthquake. The Dome of the Rock collapses. You know, the Dome of the Rock, you see over there now, it has a gold-looking top. 1032, renovations of the Dome of the Rock ordered by the Caliph Al-Zahir are finished. 1033, Jerusalem city walls are rebuilt. Up until this time, what did the Romans do to Jerusalem when they finally conquered it? They plowed it up, and so anyway, they rebuilt the walls. The walls you see that are built there now were not the ones that were there when Jesus was living on the earth, although we kind of picture it that way. That's not the walls of the city of Jerusalem, because they were all torn down by the Romans, and they were rebuilt in 1033. 1073, the Seljuks invade Palestine. That's another Muslim group. 1093, Muslims in coastal communities bar Christians from entering Palestine. So now the Muslims are saying Christians can no longer enter into this land. 1095, November 22nd, Pope Urban II launches the first crusade at the Council of Claremont. So if you want to know why, you hear people always say about the Christians are just as brutal and just as horrible as everybody else. Said, think about the Crusades. More people died in the name of religion than anything else, and more people died in the name of Christianity than anything else, and that's not true. I can tell you that's not true, because in the 20th century, what did more people die from than anything else? Was it Christianity? Was it religion? It was atheism. It was communist, atheistic communism is what more... Stalin, there's some 50 million people he had butchered. Mao Zedong, some estimate up to 100 million that he had. I don't know. There's no way to ever tell. But that's a whole lot more than what died in any of the crusades. If you take all the crusades and put them together, it wouldn't be that many. But anyway, Pope Urban II launches the first crusade at the Council of Claremont. Its principal objectives are Catholic reconquest of the sacred city of Jerusalem and the Holy Land, and the freeing of Eastern Christians from Islamic rule. So this was in 1095. 1096, 1099, First Crusade and the establishment of the Catholic Kingdom of Jerusalem. They had made it into there. 1099, June the 7th, the Crusaders reached Jerusalem and besieged the city. July the 15th, Catholic soldiers take Jerusalem after a difficult siege, killing nearly every inhabitant there. Now, when you say killing every inhabitant there was not 20 million people in that city, or a million people in that city. August the 12th, the Crusaders defeat the Fatimids at the Battle of Ascalon. 1100, December the 25th, the Kingdom of Jerusalem is established. So here we have the Christians have come back into Jerusalem in 1100 and had established the Kingdom of Jerusalem for the Christians. 1116, the Latins repair the walls of Jerusalem. 1124, the Crusaders conquer Tyre. If you remember, Tyre is up north of where Israel is today. May the 1st, the Battle of Kherson. Saladin, who was a Muslim, defeats the Crusaders. October the 2nd, Saladin captures Jerusalem from the Crusaders. 1189, 1192, Third Crusade led by the armies of Richard the Lion-Hearted. July the 12th of 1192, the Muslim garrison in Acre surrenders to the Crusaders. August the 20th, Richard executes Muslim prisoners from Acre outside the city. September the 2nd, Richard and Saladin signs the Treaty of Jaffa, a peace treaty to run for 3 years. So here we have the, quote, Christian leader, Richard the Lionheart, signs an agreement with Saladin, who's the leader of the Muslims. It's supposed to last for 3 years in that area. Does it sound like a lot of wars? You know how much war and killing I have left out to just get to this point? I mean, what I'm trying to point out here is there was conquest of this one by conquest of that one. This one conquered this one conquered that one. There was not a homogeneous group of people in a nation in this area at that time, because it kept going back and forth between one person and another, even different Muslims at the time who were fighting each other. February 18th, Frederick II and Ayubin signs the Treaty of Jaffa, a 10-year truce that restores Jerusalem, Nazareth, and Bethlehem to Christian control in exchange for protection. So here we have, on February the 18th, we have the Christians again controlling all of these cities. 1239. The ruler there destroys some of the refortifications built by the Franks in Jerusalem. 1243, the Franks recover Jerusalem. 1260, war, Egyptian Mamluks and the Mongols. Now we're introducing another group of people. We got the Mongols, which are out of the east. Attila the Hun and what was his grandson's name? Anyway, under the Mongols, they conquered all the way over into Europe back in those days. They were a pretty powerful group. So who lived in the promised land between the conquest by the Muslims in the 7th century and conquest by the Ottomans in 1517? And one way to answer that is, when? It was back and forth. You always said, but there's no way to tell how many for sure, but there was always, as far as I can find, there was a Jewish presence in that area. And after we became Christians in that area, there was a Christian presence in that area, and there was a Muslim presence in that area. But all Christians did not agree, all Muslims did not agree, and all Jews did not agree. Do all Christians agree on everything now? No. So who lived in that area? It was a mix of people. It was some Jews, it was some Christians, it was some Muslims, and how many of which one, depending on what year you want to look at, as we went through those times until we're getting up into the Ottoman Empire at 517. And that's where we're going to take up next week. So do you have any questions or comments? I wanted us to see that there was a lot of changing back and forth. And it was hard to say, well, this land was Jewish, this land was Palestinian, this land was Christian, it was